Hello and welcome to this game review. So again, we will talk about time management and when to use time, when to not use time. And generally, the time is given for calculation. We do not need time to make the moves that our intuition suggests. We just need time to check whether they work tactically or not. And if they do, then just play the move and leave yourself time for the moments when you actually have to calculate. So here, knight f3, c4, this is an opening. And like, for example, here you played e3 after a minute of thought, but this is kind of hard to fathom as surely you have had this position before. And you figured out what move is supposed to be played here. Of course, there are many moves, but you probably have your own system. So thinking for 1 minute on move 3 is already kind of absurd. You cannot play like this. This has to not really happen. And these minutes will add up. Like we see here, b3. This is all fine. Of course, black is just developing with the kind of normal setup of d5, knight f6, bishop e7, absolutely nothing special. So we cannot have less time than black at this point. This is kind of strange. Castles d4. Of course, there are other moves as well, knight c3 or bishop e2, but the decision here again does not matter. In either case, we'll get the same kind of position probably with d4, some kind of queen's gambit declined. So here already white has lost 4 minutes somehow on move 6. So if this keeps going, this simply means that the white will lose on time in 20 moves, as usual. So again, we must be more concrete with our time. There is nothing to calculate here, so there was no reason to use time. If you want to play d4, just play d4, and everything is fine. So b6, bishop e2, castles, and knight bd2. So white finally develops his pieces, and he still has 16 minutes on the clock. So now the game is actually going to begin, and this is where time will be needed. So c5, black fights in the center. Generally, white is slightly better in these positions as it's quite symmetrical, but white has the extra move, and probably white played the best way, creating some hanging pawns here. If here, then black will take back with the pawn, having the hanging pawns, and the position is quite good for both sides. White has ideas either for b4 or e4 to create some new blockading squares on the squares in front of these pawns, while black will try to improve the position as much as possible and try to gain the initiative with d4 or c4 at some point. a5 is also possible, but white has a lot of easy moves like rook c1. This knight usually needs to get involved. Knight b1, knight c3. This knight is dominated. So queen c2 is also fine. Rook e8, preparing for this. Knight e5. The piece exchanges make sense for white as he has less space and this knight can't really do much. So now rook a d1, or knight d to f3. So white is improving his pieces quite sensibly. Black plays bishop d6. And this allows white to gain some kind of small initiative, for example, like this, knight g5, threatening checkmate. And for example, if knight f8 is played after bishop d3, white will force black to play either h6 or g6. Here h6 is not really possible because of bishop h7, quite a typical tactic, and here white will be winning because black has to take, otherwise knight f7. So at some point g6 will be played, after which this diagonal will be quite weak, which will give white some kind of potential chances to attack. Something similar happened in the game. Bishop d3, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. But generally, if we're going to start attacking on the king side, we want as many pieces as possible. And here knight takes e5 is probably more critical. And now improving the knight, black will not really want to take, as now this bishop will be extremely strong, and even piece exchanges still favor white. There's a threat of taking this pawn, so there's a lot of problems here for black. So bishop takes e5 instead, and black takes, queen c7, trying to get the knight away, and the white decides to play for the initiative with f4. So we must understand that now if white plays like this, he is weakening a lot of squares, but of course he does have his triumphs. He has some nice pieces here. The rook can come over here as well, so there are certain chances of attacking. g6, g4, threatening some f5 at some point, but the knight being unstable on e5 allows black to kind of exchange some pieces. Here knight d7 would have been a good move for black, but there were some variations to consider. For example, knight takes g6, and here, if black takes this bishop, white will end up with a perpetual at some point probably, or just generally a very strong attack, which is quite dangerous. But of course, knight d7 should be played anyway, because here black does not have to recapture, which is the most important thing. Black can move the knight somewhere, and now white doesn't really have enough attackers. The position will open up in a few seconds, and black's piece advantage will show. So knight d7 would have been a good way to use white's overextended pawns. Maybe instead of g4, white could have tried to improve the pieces as much as possible. For example, the queen is not really doing much. It can go to h4. Later, the rook can help as well. And at any point, if black starts taking, then white can even shift his focus here, but probably still it's on the king side. g4, rook d8, g5. Now white gets some good control over the dark squares, and here white finds a very nice move, knight g4, getting control of these weakened squares on h6 and f6, and of course white does have some ideas on the long diagonal. But here, at some point, white will have to start calculating, and here the complications have begun. Now black has a real threat. Queen c6 was not played for no reason. Black wants to attack on this diagonal where white has weakened his king, and the threat is to take, then go queen h1 and queen h2, and either win the queen if the bishop had recaptured, or just the knight instead. So white gives this check, improving the knight with tempo. Knight is not really going anywhere else anyway, so the knight can go here. And here queen b2 was played in 20 seconds, but here this is exactly where white had to start calculating. And of course queen b2 makes sense positionally to go here, but positional stuff in chess does not have any weight. It simply does not matter compared to tactics. And tactics are the most important part of chess by far, and we must start understanding this, and this is where our time must be used. Here the game has kind of begun, and white has 7 minutes, could have had a bit more, and unfortunately queen b2 doesn't really threaten anything compared to black. After d takes c4, the bishop is attacked, as well as queen h1, queen g2, so white's threats in comparison are simply not there. Queen h8 is just one check, after which the queen is also attacked, and here the threat is mate, or the bishop as well, so the game is over. So before playing queen b2, we must have thought for at least a bit about d takes c4. d4 is also an interesting move. Here after e4, the position is quite interesting. It seems white is attacking, but this diagonal is always dangerous. Black has the nice move f5, with the point to improve his knight, try to take on e4. And the position is very wild and unbalanced. Black has some long-term assets. The bishop is quite strong. It's not clear what's going on here. But in either case, white had to kind of understand why black put his queen on c6. He did weaken his king after all. So after queen b2, the game is over because black wins a piece. And there's no real attack with two pieces. Black can just start picking up stuff. Queen f7, king d6 is played, but the threats for black are much bigger. White's pieces are uncoordinated. White is playing without two rooks, so the king being on d6 is not much of a factor. And at the end of this, white ran out of pieces. So of course it usually, as usual, comes down to one moment. Queen b2, of course a natural move, but we must calculate. And it's not clear what white calculated here. We cannot expect black to just sit there and wait for checkmate. So for the future, always calculate the opponent's forcing moves, d takes c4. Just because you created some kind of vague threat doesn't mean black is going to defend.